Welcome to Chat with a Lawyer, and I'm your host, Walla Blagay. And today we are blessed with our guest, Andrew Sowell, who is a business lawyer, and he advises small businesses on small business matters. So small business owners, listen in. Today is your day. And Andrew is going to give us some advice of what to do and to be concerned with if you are a small business owner. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about your practice.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I represent small to medium-sized businesses, and we do an array of services for them, but primarily we do commercial litigation, where we file claims and defend claims and litigation and lawsuits for businesses. Now we've sort of started taking a more proactive, preventative approach, and we work with small businesses in what we like to call legal audits. You're not in trouble or anything, but what we do is we come in with small businesses and we look at their liabilities and their assets and try to help them sort of prevent lawsuits. I mean, we can't guarantee anything, but we like to look at them and see where they are with their papers, with their filings, with their contracts, and things like that to help them, sort of prevent a lawsuit. A lot of times what happens is small businesses want to kind of do things on their own in the beginning, and then they end up in a lawsuit, and that's when they start asking for help. So we saw that they could save money and keep more money in their pocket if we could kind of step in before a lawsuit takes place. So that's what we do a lot of now as well.
Sounds like important work. Well, let's talk about the different business entities. Now, when we're driving by or we're dealing with different various business, we see LLC behind them or incorporated, or we know someone has their own business as maybe a sole proprietorship. So explain each one of these and what the risk is.
Okay. Well, a sole proprietor there's no difference between the business and the person. So somebody wants to start their own business and they're a sole proprietor, they open their own business. So there's no real filing or paperwork outside of permits and licenses that are required. They are their business. A sole proprietor has little to no insulation or shield from their personal liabilities and assets, which is what the business entities try to do. So an LLC, what is known as an LLC, is a limited liability company. And what that does is protects the personal assets from the business assets. So somebody can operate an LLC and they have business liability and business assets, and that protects separate from their personal assets, which is what you really want to prevent. So in essence, an LLC would protect a business owner's home from being seized, or having a lien placed on their home for their business work. There's that. Then you have corporations, and the difference between an LLC and a corporation is an LLC has members and a corporation has shareholders. So with an LLC, members can manage the LLC, or they can have managers that would manage the LLC. And with the shareholder, they don't do any of the daily business management of the corporation. They're just shareholders. So then you have that. Then you have partnerships, limited liability partnerships, general partners, and then a little limited partner. So that would be an LLP, limited liability partnership. With that, then you have a general partner that takes care of the management of the business, and limited partner, which just has interest in the business but doesn't have management or control over the business.
Now, can you talk you touched on this a little bit, but let's go back to having the sole proprietorship. Now, what is the risk of you being almost the same identity as your company?
Well, that's the big risk. The risk there is if something happens with your business, then your personal assets are in jeopardy, meaning your personal bank account, your savings, your home, things like that. Those are what you want to protect by having a separate business entity. The business entity is its own individual, entity. They're considered a person, within themselves. If you're a sole proprietor, you don't have any of the protection. What's called the corporate veil, or a shield that protects your personal assets. There's nothing there that would protect you if you're a sole proprietor. So you open yourself up, and all that you have and you work for would be open up to the business liabilities as well.
So if you are a member of an LLC and someone sues your company, and then the company they go through the assets, it's all liquidation, and then there's nothing else left. Can they go after the member?
There are certain scenarios where there could, but generally no. Okay, that's where you have to pierce the corporate veil. So you would have to see that the individual member of the LLC did something outside of their scope, outside of what they're doing for the business for them to go after the personal assets. So, I mean, that's why you would separate the two, or you would have an LLC as opposed to being a sole proprietor. With a sole proprietor, they could go directly after your assets, personal assets.
Now, explain sort of having separate. What does that mean? Maybe the meetings, like what do you need to do as a member of an LLC to make sure that they can't go after your personal assets?
Well, I mean, that's what we do. You create your articles of organization and you file those with your regulatory body, government, and then you have your tax, you file with the tax office and things like that. And then once you do that, you'll receive a certificate of registration, which says that you are now a legitimate business LLC. Okay, once you do that, then you operate as the LLC. So when you enter into contracts or you form agreements with people, you would form them as the LLC. So you would come up with a business name and you would do business under that name in the LLC. So that's how you would do that.
Okay, that's good. And what about, are there any like bylaws or anything that you need to put together?
Absolutely. That's one of the things we really like to work with small business owners. We like to say you got to go slow to go fast. A lot of times people just want to open a business and start operating the business, and then they forget to do the operating agreement, which really controls and determines how you run your business. It controls the management of your business. It controls, who's paid and how they're paid and things like that when you have your meetings. It also controls the dissolution of your business, which is very important as well. So your operating agreement is really crucial to being an LLC, especially when you're a small business owner. That really determines how you're going to operate moving forward. And a lot of times people overlook that. They go online and they have the boilerplate articles of organization, and then they go down and they register their business and they get a tax ID number, and then they just start running the business, and they don't look long term. And what we really want to do is we want to help small business owners achieve their actual goals. We want you to be successful. So to do that, you really need to go slow in the beginning and iron out your operating agreement. How you're going to do your business, how you're going to conduct business with vendors, with third parties and things like that. So the operating agreement is really important, and it's overlooked a lot of times.
Interesting. And now, is this something, now explain your audit system that you discussed before.
Yeah, that's just kind of a thing that we came up with because we like to go in and work with businesses. What we do is we come in and we'll see a small business owner, or we'll have to deal with some business with them, a contract or something, and we'll come in and we'll say, well, what is your operating agreement? What are your articles of organization? What kind of contracts do you have? How did you sign your contracts? We'll look at their assets and we'll look at their liabilities. And what we'll try to do is minimize their liabilities and protect their assets. So if they're operating in a certain fashion, or they're not following procedure, the regulatory procedures, the statutory procedures, and then their own internal procedures. So we make sure that their operating agreement and their procedures are really, ironed out, they're clear, they're precise, and they're following those procedures.
Can you touch a little bit, just don't mean to interrupt you, about how important following those procedures, what does that lead to?
Right, well, it leads to the prevention of problems. It kind of cuts the problem off in the past, meaning, what does your employment contract look like? How are you filing your taxes? Are you filing them quarterly? Are you filing them monthly? Employment taxes, income taxes, things of that nature. Are your filings up to date? That's another big problem. You have annual and biannual filings with your regulatory agency. Are your articles up to date? Are your filings clear? Are you behind? Things like that. A lot of times an LLC will be revoked because they haven't filed their papers, or they filed them incompletely. And so they didn't, file a complete filing, so then their LLC is revoked. So then you have to go back and correct that. You have to fix it. And sometimes that's a problem.
Interesting. Now so you make sure the procedures are proper, and then what else do you do with the audits?
If they're not proper, or they're incomplete, or they're gaps, or there's, something that we see that would increase their liabilities, we try to fix that for them. A lot of, things that happen, with the operating agreement in terms of what happens to the business if something happens. You can have a single member LLC or you can have multi-member LLCs, okay? So if they're multi-member LLCs, what happens when one of the members just dies or is deceased, okay? What's gonna move, how's the LLC gonna move forward? If it's a single member LLC, what's gonna happen to the LLC when that member, dies? What do you want to do if you want to expand your LLC? A lot of times we may start off as a single member LLC, but we want to expand and bring somebody else on, or we want to buy more things. If there's a dispute between two members that one member wants to do something and the other one doesn't want to do something, how do you resolve that dispute, without having to dissolve the LLC as a whole?
So is it one of those things where you have to write out every scenario in the operating agreement, or should you, how do you deal with those various issues?
No, you wouldn't write out every scenario. That's why a lot of times the operating agreements are ignored or overlooked, or people don't want to deal with them because they can be long, they can be intense. There are a lot of scenarios that you can try to protect against in the operating agreement, and that's why people just don't want to do them. Especially a small business owner or a single member LLC, they don't want to have an operating agreement because it takes up time. They don't really know how to do them. They don't want to spend the money to consult with an attorney, or a tax expert to really get those details ironed out. But those are important, they're crucial, they're what makes a difference between a lasting LLC and one that may struggle. So we try to anticipate a lot of different scenarios, and you can, that's the thing, depending on what kind of business it is, what they're doing, how they're operating, where they're operating, it really determines, what kind of operating agreement they're going to have.
Interesting. Well, now what if I have a business and I want to buy another business?
Right. Well, we deal a lot with that. Not necessarily a business buying a business. What we do now is we'll have an individual person that wants to buy a business. That can be creative, and it can be intense as well, in the sense that what we always ask the person or the individual is, what are you buying, and how are you buying it? And a lot of people can't really answer that question, meaning are you buying inventory? Are you buying a building? Are you buying, real property or personal property is how we distinguish between the two.
Well, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this. We'll take a short break, so stay with us.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy! And refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.com.
Welcome back to Chat with the Lawyer with your host, Walla Blagay. And we were talking with Andrew about buying a business, back to small business issues. So tell us about some of the issues that one would run into buying another business.
That's a really good one. When somebody buys a business, we like to start out by asking them, like I said earlier, what are you buying and how are you buying it? A lot of times when somebody comes in and buys an existing business, there are a couple of things we look at. One, what is the current inventory? Two, are you buying real property or personal property? And then how are you buying it? And a lot of times we look at it in terms of the seller as well, because the seller has goodwill in the business. So what the goodwill is their name and reputation in the community. So they could have, a dollar amount of inventory. They can have a dollar amount of real property in the business. But they could also have an increased value of the business based on that person's goodwill. So we want to look at things like that. We also want to look at it in terms of the purchaser. Are they taking over the business or are they just going to buy the business? Meaning that, somebody could come in and just buy all the inventory from the business and then go start their own business. Or they could come in and buy the business and take it over and then they become that business. If that's the case, then we have to go through and transfer all the papers, the permits, the licenses. Then we have to really look at the operating agreement there. Does the operating agreement allow this to happen? Are you having a single member LLC that you're buying? Are you buying a corporation? Are you buying a partnership? Are you buying a sole proprietorship? As well as the purchaser, how are they going to buy it? Are they going to buy it as themselves or are they going to buy it as another business? So then we have to create a separate business for them and that business buys the existing business. So then there are a lot of things like that.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's go back into we talked a little bit before about various business entities.
Right.
So now, how do you know which one works for your particular, idea?
Right. Well, that's when you got to sit down, and that's what we really encourage people to do. It doesn't happen a lot, like I said in the beginning, because small and individual business owners and small business owners, they really don't have a lot of money, and they think attorneys cost too much. They don't want to put down the money up front to really iron out these problems. But we encourage them to talk with a lawyer, talk with a tax expert to really see what fits best for them. With the different types of business entities that they have, you really need to find the one that really works best for you in terms of your tax liability, in terms of protecting your personal assets, and really keeping your overhead down.
And what are some of the things that you consider if someone says, I'm trying to start a business, right. Andrew, they come and sit down with you and they say, now, how should I get an LLC? Should I get a corporation? Should I get a sole proprietorship? What are some of the key things that you look at when you...
Well, the number one key thing is what business are you trying to get into? That really depends what kind of entity you want to create. So there's a thing called an S Corp, which is a corporation, but it's a single member corporation. So an example for that would be like a real estate agent. A real estate agent doesn't have a lot of overhead. And it's really, if they're an independent real estate agent, I should say, that they work for themselves, they work for themselves. They're the one doing all the business. They're the one putting up all the costs. So what you want to do is really minimize the tax liability. So you don't want them to be taxed twice. There's not a lot of, risk or liability to the individual when it comes to real estate transactions. And I don't mean to minimize real estate transactions. I just mean that there's not a high risk of hurting somebody. There's not a high risk of, getting in danger and causing something that would really send you into protracted litigation in those terms. And once again, I'm not minimizing real estate agents. They do a lot of good work. If you're getting into something where there's a high risk, if you're a contractor, if you want to start build homes and things of that nature, I would say that you'd want an LLC because you have a greater chance of risk and liability to your business. If you have employees, how many employees are you going to have? Do you have to insurance and things of that nature? Whereas that's why I use the example as a real estate agent. If you're a real estate agent, you may have one employee or you may have one subcontractor, things like that. Whereas if you run a dry cleaner, and you have to have, insurance and clothes and things like that, whatever your insurance liability is, then we would say you probably want to be an LLC. So it really depends on what kind of business you're running and what you want to do. Also, it depends on what you want to do long term. If you're going to just be a one-shop, business, you're never going to expand past this one shop, that would make a difference too. If you want to grow and you have the capacity to grow in whatever your business is, that would make a difference as well.
Interesting. Now, I know you deal with also business plans also, so talk a little bit about that or what you advise your clients.
Once again, you got to go slow to go fast. You really need a business plan. It's the old saying that you create a plan for chaos in a time of peace. So when things aren't crazy, then you want to sit down and really map out a plan that you're going to operate from. Because if you're a small business owner, you know that your business is going to ebb and flow. So there's going to be good quarters, there are going to be bad quarters, there are going to be good years, there are going to be bad years. Mm-hmm. So what we really want to do is kind of help them get that plan in place so that if they have a good year, they don't spend all their capital and they have some in reserve when there's a bad year. So you really need a plan. So we try to help them with the plan. We try to help them with their target market, their management, how they're going to run things. And so if they can get that plan ironed out, then they have a better chance of sustaining a long-term profit.
And just go over, you mentioned this before, but a lot of people start businesses and they have like LegalZoom, they say you can draft up any agreement you need, you can just draft it up right there. What do I need a lawyer for? It's too expensive.
Right.
Explain the risk.
The risk of that, I don't want to talk about any specific, those internet sites that do that. They are good. They people can go and get a contract and see what's happening. If it's a small one-time contract, no problem. A lot of times, where the problem comes in is when they're going to use that same contract over and over, and where they don't understand the language. Where, the language in the contract says one thing and they think it says something else. Or they want it to say something and it doesn't say that. Then they enter into that contract without knowing what the language is, and then there's a breach of that contract. Somebody doesn't perform their obligation of that contract, and then you have to go to court. What happens then? That's the biggest problem. The other problem with those is that they don't complete them properly. They'll have a contract, they'll enter into a contract with a third party, and then they'll sign their name as an individual, not as the LLC. Well, that opens the door to their personal assets. You just negated the LLC and the purpose of having a business entity when you enter into the contract as an individual. So they think they're entering into the contract as a business, but they signed it as the individual. That makes them an individual party to the contract, not a business to the contract. So that's the other problem that we have there. How they open up themselves to personal liabilities when they're really trying to operate as an LLC or a business, and they don't understand that that's what's happening.
Interesting. Well, talk about common problems. What are the trouble spots in business, in small business, running your small business?
There are a lot of them. It depends.
Endless list.
Yeah, it goes on. That's the fun part about being a small business owner. You have so much room for creativity, and you also have so much room for risk. A lot of it is, a lot of times people are disciplined in one area and they sort of overlook another area and don't realize that area it could come back to create problems for them. That all depends. They could be really good with managing money and then be really poor with managing, their reports. Okay. They could be really poor about documenting what's going on. They could have no employment contracts. And they come in and, they just hire people, they trust them, they're good people, and they probably are good people, but then something could happen with the employment, and they don't document the employment. They don't have an employment contract, they don't have an employment procedure, they don't have a grievance procedure, and then they don't document the problems. Well, that could come back to get them.
Now, and just make sure because I want to stop right on this. What if you hire family members? What if, it's a small business shop, I'm just going to hire my grandkids and my cousin, and do you still need an employment?
That's when you definitely need an employment contract. And a lot of small businesses do that, and that's a good thing. That's the part that I really enjoy about small businesses is that it really is a lot of family members that work together. And I like the mom and pop shops. I like the fact that, that they bring the children in, they bring the grandchildren in, and they prolong that business, for years and for decades. And if you have that business in your neighborhood and you bring your grandkid back and say, I used to come here when I was a kid, I really like that. But that's when you really need those procedures. When that happens and you have to transfer the business to the next generation, how do you transfer it? Who's going to take over managerial roles? Who's going to get whatever asset, that you have there? And then, if you hire your cousin and your cousin does a bad job and you have to let him go, then what's going to happen there? So you definitely need a contract when you have family members. So you got to, be able to say specifically, this is business and this is family.
Yeah.
So, but that's fun though.
What's some of the other trouble spots that you run into?
Really just maintaining your filings, maintaining your reports. A lot of people don't realize that, and they'll miss a report, or they'll get the notice and they'll just kind of put it on the desk along with all the other things that have to get done. And the next thing you know, their license has been revoked and they have to pay fines and penalties to go get it reinstated. So those are really the problems. The other problems are, in terms of expanding and dissolution. That's really a big thing that small business owners don't look into. And that's part of the operating agreement and why we really encourage them to have a very thorough operating agreement, because your business grows, and when it grows you want to bring your family member in to enjoy the wealth and the benefits of that. Well, how do you do that? Does your operating agreement allow you to do that? Do you sell memberships? How do you sell a membership interest in an LLC? Things of that nature. Those are really the problems.
Okay. Now let's talk about, you talked about disillusion. Like what happens? What is the process of ending a business?
Okay. Well, it's called the winding up process. And there's statutory rules that you have to go by. Laws that require a business to do certain things. Really, what happens is they don't follow those rules and procedures, and they wind up opening themselves up to personal liability. You can't just shut your door. You've got to give notice that you're winding up your business. You've got to pay off all your creditors and wind up your liability so you don't end up with personal liability for the business adventure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to have you come back and give us some good individual advice about small business issues.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's a good program. Thanks
All right. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Remember to please email us at chatwiththelawyer@gmail.com. Thank you.
America's service members and veterans are strong, forged out of bravery, sacrifice, and duty. From all corners of the country, a family for life. But whether they served in lands far away or communities close to home, some of these men and women may face difficult times or even crisis. But sometimes reaching out for help can be the most challenging and worthwhile mission of all. Thankfully, friends, family, and communities are standing by their service members and veterans now more than ever. We're all in this together. When you recognize something isn't right, make the call to the Veterans Crisis Line or Military Crisis Line. Times of crisis, reach out and call. Dial 1-800-273-8255 and press 1.
Simple moments are what make every day count.